All right, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Cover Zero IDP podcast, a part of the Going for Two network. My name is Jordan, and I am here with my co-host Hasan. Hasan, what's going on? We got a lot to talk about tonight. A lot of teams on buys, a very active trade deadline. How you feeling after everything?
Man, NFL record 10 trades happened and they just didn't stop and even went a little bit after the deadline, for the West Coast teams and the other time zones and stuff. So a lot of stuff happened and we'll see how these guys integrate in. I'm a very big believer in, it takes a full training camp to
Mm-hmm.
integrate guys in, or it'll, like, if you get to the playoffs, like kind of like OB last year where he didn't do a lot, but then in the playoffs he went insane. That can also happen as well. So, we'll see how they do, but I expect obviously the elite players to be able to just kind of come in and do their thing. What
Yeah, no, and there'll be a lot of. I thought it was interesting last year being a Rams fan and seeing a few big midseason acquisitions. It did take a little bit of time. Even when Von Miller came over, it wasn't week one that he was effective. It took a good 3 or 4 weeks until you even saw him getting consistent snaps. And he was coming off an injury, so it was a little different, but it's a different scheme. You got to find, it's a chess match at the end of the day, and it's not only for the player but from a coaching perspective too. They got to see where these guys fit into it. So let's dive into the specifics a little bit here, and before we do that, make sure you guys follow us on Twitter as well. The show does have its own Twitter. It's at Cover Zero, and that's zero spelled out. Cover Zero GF2. So let's dive into it. I'll just list all of them out here, and then we'll kind of break down some of the big IDP ones, which there definitely was some pretty big IDP moves here. So first one, Pittsburgh got cornerback William Jackson. Denver, Jake Martin, linebacker. Atlanta acquired Rashad Fenton, cornerback. A few offensive moves as well. Buffalo got Naheem Hines. Jacksonville with Calvin Ridley. Miami, Jeff Wilson, Denver getting Chase Edmonds, Chicago acquiring Chase Claypool, then or TJ Hawkinson going over to the Vikings, and then probably the two biggest IDP acquisitions, Miami acquiring Bradley Chubb, and then Baltimore getting Roquan Smith, which seemed like a long time coming that Roquan was going to be moving. And we finally, after much discussion, know what his landing spot is going to be. So what are your initial thoughts on some of these transactions here?
I think Smith is going to help a lot, and Patrick Queen, who was drafted to be a pretty big piece for them, he hasn't been that great yet, and I think Roquan could be a very good mentor for him, to bounce off of him and learn for him that way. And then with Chubb, I mean, he also just got paid as soon as he hit
Mm-hmm.
Miami as well. Very big contract extension. He It's very interesting with Chubb because there are some games he looks like he's the most dominant player on the field, and then there's some games where he's just not doesn't look like he's out there at all. And I don't know if that's a product of being on bad teams, and just not having enough help on the D line, which now obviously he does with Emmanuel Ogba, Christian Wilkins, and on a good team as well so far. So we'll see how he does there week to week. And Roquan is going to be Roquan. He's going to be all over the place. And I don't know if it's a rental, though. That's the one thing, because they got to extend Lamar Jackson next year, and they have to extend Roquan Smith next year. So I don't know if it's the kind of thing that the Rams did last year, where it's, hey, let's just go get Vaughn for about 10 games, try to see if we can win a ring, and he's out. So we'll see with that. And then Rashad Fenton, he was needed because AJ Terrell got
Mm-hmm.
injured, and their cornerback group besides him is very bad, very bad. Jake Martin, I do like that move as well. He was coming on well. He's playing a little bit better, and I don't know if for personal IDP purposes he'll be playing amazingly, but he will definitely help Denver's defense. And then William Jackson, he is definitely not a bad cornerback, not anything special, but he's definitely serviceable enough. And Pittsburgh needs all the help they can get defensively without TJ Watt. So,
Yeah, and so the Roquan Smith one is interesting. We'll see if he is there long term. I mean, he's a foundational piece on the defensive side of the ball, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do keep him. But the Ravens do have the advantage of not having to pay Lamar Jackson a ton of money, and we've seen it time and time again where once you pay that quarterback $40 to $50 million, that puts a little bit of strain on the old salary cap. So this might be, their window this season to make a big acquisition like this before they have to start picking and choosing who they can keep long term. So I will say I wasn't the biggest fan of Patrick Queen coming out of college. And I think this is a good spot for him because I don't know if he's a starting linebacker in the NFL, but I don't know if he's a number one guy. So I think this gives him an opportunity to play alongside somebody because when you're an offensive coordinator, you're going to be scheming around Roquan Smith. He's that kind of impact player. So I think that's going to open up more opportunity for Patrick Queen. I think a lot of people are viewing it as, oh, this is the end of Patrick Queen, but next to Patrick Queen this season, the other linebacker spots have been kind of a rotating, revolving door for the Ravens. And I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. You're going to see Roquan at one spot, and you're going to see Patrick Queen playing close to 100% of the snaps at the other spot. So he's not going to be losing playing time. And if anything, there's going to be more opportunity for him to not be the focal point for an offense. So I actually kind of like it for his value. I'm probably in the minority there because I've heard a lot of people say, that's the end of Patrick Queen. I'm like, I don't agree with that. I think it's actually a good opportunity for him. The Bradley Chubb one, obviously that's big for Miami long term. Jalen Phillips and him are going to be very scary along that defensive front. Jalen Phillips is still only 23 and developing, and he's looked really good over his first few seasons here. The thing with Miami that's odd to me is their defense overall has not really played that well. But when you look at the talent they have, they really should be. They have talent at every level on the defensive side of the ball. So as much as this move it looks great on paper, they need to be productive. That's the reality for this team. So I want to see how they fit those pieces together. If not, they're going to have to look at a defensive coordinator shift because if you can't use all those chess pieces effectively, you're doing something wrong. I mean, that's the reality.
and they were amazing under Flores.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And a lot of those pieces were still there under Flores. So it's, as you said, the defensive coordinator might need to change if they can't get it together.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, they don't really have a weak point anymore with Wilkins and Phillips and Bradley Chubb, and then you go to the linebacking core and you have Jerome Baker and Landon Roberts. Then you have Xavier Howard, Jevon Holland in the secondary. So, I mean, there's talent everywhere. So I'm very interested to see how that plays together because theoretically it should be a great opportunity for Bradley Chubb and others along that defensive front because I mean, you really can't double team any of them. I mean, that's a reality because you're going to be leaving somebody vulnerable. So I think you're going to have to be really creative as an offensive coordinator going up to against Miami. So I'm interested to see how it impacts Jalen Phillips. I think the missing piece of this too, and we'll talk a little bit about this. I know you have it in your weekly twos, and I'll talk about it a little bit as well. But it also offers some opportunity for the teams that these guys are leaving. I think there's a lot of questions. I'm not sure who's going to step up yet with Denver once Randy Gregory comes back. It's probably going to be Randy Gregory and Baron Browning on the outside. Right now, there's a lot of injuries for the Broncos along that front, so it's going to be a rotating door, I think, right now. But, then in Chicago, it offers a lot of opportunity for Nick Morrow and some of those other young linebackers to step up. So the other one, I will say Rashad Fenton, too. I mean, the Falcons have a legitimate chance to make the playoffs. So, as much as it sounds odd, they're in a position now where they're trying to stay competitive, keep their lead right now. They control their own destiny theoretically at this point. They're the lead dogs there. So I think it was a good move. And even when AJ Terrell is back, they kind of struggled with, okay, who's the guy behind him? So that fills a big need for them. So also of note this week, there are 6 teams on a bye, and I think that's important to talk about, and I know I'll bring it up a few more times, I'm sure, in this episode. There's a few lineups for me where I was really banging my head against the wall going, oh gosh, I have a lot of guys on bye this week. I had to pick up some guys off of waivers that are going to be inserted directly into my lineup. I know for me personally, I don't really look at buys when I'm drafting. I don't let that impact my decision-making process, which I personally really don't think that it should, but I know everybody plays that a little differently. So I happen to have quite a few players on bye this week, and there's some where, I mean, legitimately, I have like 4 guys in my lineup that are out this week. So that makes definitely lineup decisions. Streaming defenses, I think, is really tough this week. There's not really a lot of high quality candidates on the waiver wire right now, but there's some potential opportunity with some of the teams that are on bye. Some of their defenses are being dropped. I've seen the Broncos dropped a few times, and they've been a top 10 defense. So that's important to note for this week. A few other injuries. We've mentioned the AJ Terrell, Delvin Tomlinson, Cole Holcomb, Mike Hilton, Jordan Poyer, Antoine Winfield, Amani Hooker, all out this week. So those are the big injuries. Few questionable guys, so make sure you check in on that as well. But that's kind of the big injury news right now. And then the last thing I'll touch on before we start heading into the weekly twos, a few waiver wire guys that I wanted to bring up. I mentioned Christian Harris last week, and I think especially he had a solid game again last night as well. So I'll bring it up one more time because it's probably, I mentioned him in a dynasty regard last week, but I think he's going to be on the redraft radar now as well. 7 tackle performance last night. They're using him a lot very quickly, and Lovie Smith seems to really like him. So Christian Harris is going to be a focal point of that defense for the Texans. So I'd scoop him up now. He has linebacker 1 upside. I think he has that kind of ability. A few other guys that were injured and recently came back. Josie Jewell, who was super effective before the injury. He did bounce back with 7 tackles in his first game. With the Broncos being on bye, there's the potential that people are going to drop him. So keep an eye out for that. I've seen it happen, and he has, he's a top 20 linebacker when he's been healthy this year with a very consistent top 15 performer, actually, if you really look at his numbers throughout the year. So a lot of opportunity there. Willie Gay as well has back-to-back. He's played 4 games this year, has 32 total tackles. So he's been very, very effective when he's been healthy. I've mentioned it before, but I really, really like and love the talent that he has. And when he's been healthy, he's been effective. And once again, another guy, the Chiefs run a bye last week. He got dropped quite a bit, so he's most likely on the waiver wire. People probably weren't holding on to Willie Gay through his bye week. So I'd snag him up. The talent's there. With all the bye weeks, there's the opportunity to start him this week as well. And then the last one I mentioned, Nicholas Morrow as well. He's probably going to be the number 1 dog on for the linebacking core for those Bears. So a lot of upside, and a guy that definitely wasn't owned prior to this trade, but should be 100% owned. So, all right. Let's go into the weekly twos and dive into that a little bit. If you haven't watched the show before, what we do is we talk about 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 2 defensive backs that we really like this week. And we try to make it guys that aren't necessarily obvious. So guys that are either outside of our top 25, or for me, I'll do it on, in the 20s somewhere. So they're not quite on everybody's radar as a no-brainer starter. So we'll go through that. Our rankings are posted on our Twitter, which is at cover0, 0 spelled out, GF2. So check that out. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them on Twitter. And we definitely like interacting when people have questions on our rankings. So let's dive into it. We'll start with defensive linemen. Obviously, Jerry's not here tonight, so he did leave some notes, so I'll drop his players as well, but we won't go too far into it. So his 2 defensive linemen this week are BJ Hill of the Bengals versus the Panthers, and then his homer pick of the week, Ed Oliver of the Bills versus the Jets. So Hasan, who do you have as your first defensive lineman here?
I got Christian Wilkins of the Dolphins, and he's coming off his worst game of the season, but okay, now Bradley Chubb comes in, so that takes some attention off of him. So, and it's definitely a very high ceiling this week because he's playing a Bears team that runs 60% of the time. They give up 4.5 pressures a game as well, and they're averaging in the range that Wilkins plays in 16 rush attempts a game. So very many opportunities for tackles, tackles for loss, no gains, something like that. And of course, if you can get 10 points out of an D lineman, you're going to be happy. And Wilkins, besides last week, had been giving you around 13 to 15 every week. So he probably bounces back.
Yeah, no, it's a nice matchup for him. The Bears' offensive line has been pretty terrible, and I know last time that I looked, they led the league in runs stuffed at the line of scrimmage or behind. So I know they're definitely up in that category as well, which definitely gives them some nice upside as well. And I would say probably a pretty safe floor, honestly, in a matchup like that too. My first defensive lineman is Bruce Irvin, who I didn't realize is 35 years old, apparently. He got signed a few weeks ago which is crazy. I remember him coming out, so apparently I've been watching football for a while now, but he got signed to their practice squad a few weeks ago, and he very quickly got activated to their roster. The Seahawks front defensive line has been a little banged up. Darrell Taylor is going to be out this week. And I saw a little bit of Bruce Irvin last week, and honestly, he looked pretty explosive. And he's always been a really strong pass rusher. That's been his forte. He is not interested in stopping the run. He is kind of an all-out, let me go get the quarterback kind of guy, which offers some upside. He can also have a big dud, but I think they're banged up along that offensive line right now. The Cardinals are going to scheme and probably double team Nwasu because he's been fantastic this season along that defensive front for them. So I think that's going to open up some opportunities for Bruce Irvin. The Cardinals offensive line overall has not been very strong. They've allowed the 5th most points to IDP defensive linemen this year. So it's been a really favorable matchup. Bruce Irvin, he's fresh right now too, and I don't think that can be understated at this point in the season. We're seeing a lot of injuries, guys banged up. So I like a guy coming in fresh. He's only played the last 2 weeks for them now, but I think he has the potential to bring Kyler Murray down this week and offer you a nice streaming option with all these buys.
Nice. I like that a lot. And then, I like it for just the Seahawks in general because he was there with the Legion of Boom. So he can help mentor some guys. He knows Pete Carroll, for a very long time. So knows his temperament and everything like that. So it's very good. All right, my second defensive lineman is going to be Matt Ioannidis of the Panthers. Nobody can spell this guy's last name right, but he's 14th among all interior defensive linemen pressures. The Bengals, they allow 5 interior pressures per game, and they throw the ball more than any other team in the NFL over the past 3 weeks. And I definitely think it's worthy of taking a chance on him. And Ioannidis, he's up and down. But again, the Bengals O-line has not been great this year. And with that many pass attempts happening, he'll definitely have a chance to get you some points this week and get you some good ones.
Yeah, I still think one of the biggest surprises to me is how much the Bengals invested in that offensive line, and they're still not good. I know I praised the Bengals all off season for what they did because to me that's how an off season should go. You diagnose a weak point and then you spend money and invest in it, and they did that, and it has not gone as planned. So that's been one of I think the underrated storylines for me. That's still surprising because I liked their approach, and I don't think they necessarily did anything wrong. It just hasn't worked out thus far, and maybe it takes some time for them to click, but we'll see how that progresses. My second defensive lineman, it's one that Jerry brought up a few weeks ago in an episode when it was just Jerry and I, but that's Joe Tryon-Shoyinka of the Tampa Bay Bucks going up against the good old Rams offensive line. I'm not going to dive into it that much because we've mentioned it several times that if you want to stream a defensive lineman, just pick somebody that's going up against the Rams. I mean, that's the reality with how bad this offensive line is. And I mean, I love his talent. He's a big guy, 6'5". I think he's around 260 actually, with a lot of speed. I really liked him coming out and thought he had a lot of upside, and he's been given an opportunity with some of those injuries. So he had a sack last week. He looks a lot more comfortable with the playing time that he's getting. This feels like it could be a multiple sack game for him, and he's a guy that's definitely under the radar, available in most leagues because I don't think most people know who he is, but this could be the kind of game where people are like, okay, I have to pay attention to who this guy is, and he might be on the waiver wire segment very soon. So I think it's a nice spot for him to have a little bit of a coming out part. As much as I don't want that, I think it's a good spot for him to do it.
Yeah, I mean, 8 different starting lineups, offensive line wise, in 8 games for the Rams. It's, as you said, very easy to just pick anyone against the Rams. All right. So my first linebacker is going to be, and I didn't even notice this. Jerry actually mentioned it.
Yeah.
Kenneth Murray. So I'll dive a little bit deeper on him. Murray, we've been waiting for him to turn that corner before he came in the league as a 23rd overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft. He's getting it together. I've noticed that a little bit. And definitely, I believe that, because they're playing a run-heavy team like the Falcons, and because other linebackers on the Chargers have been becoming focal points, that he'll have a chance to rack up a lot of tackles as well. And Atlanta runs so much that it's just very easy to be able to rack up tackles. And we all know tackles are going to be the ones that get you the points.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Jerry had him as well, and then Jerry's second linebacker I'll bring up was Alex Anzalone of the Lions up against the Packers, which is a good one. I seen a lot of people high on good old Rodrigo this week, so fits along those lines as well against the Packers team that's been a lot more run heavy than we're used to seeing under Aaron Rodgers. So they're actually I believe I don't have the number right in front of me, but I believe they were in the top 5 in points allowed to linebackers this year. So it's actually a pretty favorable matchup when linebackers are going up against the Packers. So my my first linebacker here is kind of under the radar, always throwing a wild card guy, gives me an opportunity to dive in and talk about somebody that's probably not as much of a household name, or somebody that's not on a lot of people's radar. So my first linebacker is Jack Sanborn of the Chicago Bears. And a lot of the spotlight has been on Nicholas Morrow, and I do think that he's probably going to lead this team in tackles, but Roquan was really a chess piece for this defense that moved all around the formation. And from what I've read, it doesn't seem like that's the role that Nicholas Morrow is going to fill. They want to find a guy that can move all around. Jack Sanborn did a lot of that in college, and there's kind of been some talk he's going to be that chess piece for them as a rookie. So it might not be week 1 here, but I do think he's going to have an opportunity to step in and get a pretty big snap share. Going back to his senior season at Wisconsin, he was all over the field. He had 90 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, a few forced fumbles. He did a little bit of everything. So he feels like the kind of guy, if you use him effectively, I think he can be a potential chess piece to fill in some of those voids that are left behind by Roquan Smith. So Jack Sanborn, I'm going to throw his name in there because I think it's an interesting conversation to even think about. Is there's a lot to make up with Roquan leaving, and somebody's going to have to pick up that production, and not that full production because none of them have the talent of Roquan, but and I think Jack Sanborn has the potential to step into that role. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at Nick Morrow earlier, and that's what they're talking about, that he's probably not going to do exactly what Roquan was doing, so someone's got to step in there to do that. Yeah. And if it's got to be combined production to, match Roquan, that's completely fine. All right, so my second linebacker, it's another Charger because, again, they're playing the Falcons, who run the ball almost all the time. They had a game where they ran it 40 times and threw it 14. And he's become a regular in our rankings and our twos that I checked, and he's not even rostered in 10% of all IDP only leagues, which is very interesting to me because this is a guy, he's had at least 7 tackles in every single game since week 3. He plays the second most run-oriented offense in the league this week. And tackle-oriented players always get tons of them versus teams like the Falcons. I'd expect Tranquil, also to get to Mariota 1 or 2 times because they do like just running them straight through the middle, right, for sacks as well. And Mariota also will scramble around and get caught behind the line of scrimmage a couple of times as well, so that can definitely happen. So Tranquil, definitely a very good player, but not rostered in a lot of places. So go get him, and he's definitely going to get points. Definitely going to get a lot of points this week.
Yeah, it is interesting, too, thinking about that Atlanta offense. There's 3 teams right now that are kind of way below everybody else in terms of total pass attempts, and it's the Bears, Atlanta, and Tennessee, and then there's a big jump for everybody else. The Bears are only averaging 20 pass attempts, and Tennessee and Atlanta are hovering around 22, and then there's a pretty significant jump after that. So, yeah, anytime you're playing any 3 of those teams, it definitely offers a safe floor, which I think is important for me when you're streaming. You can take 2 approaches where you can go really aggressive and go all in for the big points, or you can say, okay, I'm going to be a little safer here because I just need a guy I can plug in and I know is going to get me a solid number of points. And I think anyone that's playing those 3 teams kind of falls into that category. You can feel kind of safe knowing that they're going to have some level of production. My second linebacker is a guy that I already mentioned, and that is Patrick Queen. And there's a few reasons for this. A, I already kind of talked about. I do think there's going to be some opportunity for him not being the guy anymore in that linebacking core. B, I don't think that Roquan Smith's going to necessarily step in and play 100% of the snaps in week 1. Don't get me wrong, he's talented. Is he going to play a very, very large percentage of them? I'm not suggesting you bench Roquan Smith, but, it's going to take a little bit of a few weeks for him to ease into that scheme, kind of like what we mentioned in the open. So I think they're going to be scheming, teams that are playing them, the Saints this week, are going to be scheming to stop Roquan, which is going to offer opportunities for Queen. And The matchup is good overall too. I mean, this is another team that's been a little more run centric. They've allowed the third most points to linebackers this season, so it's a nice matchup. I think the stars kind of align with Roquan coming over. It's his first week, so I kind of like the matchup this week for Patrick Queen, and I think this could be his opportunity to say, "Hey, I'm still here."
Definitely, definitely. All right. So my first defensive back is going to be Mike Jackson of the Seahawks. A lot of people have already started to plug in Jackson, but he's still available in tons of leagues. Him and Tariq Woolen, they both had strong starts to the season. But basically, this week, he's 100% a must start, must pick up. Reason being is DeAndre Hopkins, since he's come back, he's lined up on the left side on 66% of snaps. Last week, it was 86%. And Rondell Moore, they put him back in the slot. And then Jackson, he lines up on the left side 82% of the time this season. So Hopkins getting 27 targets, 22 catches first 2 weeks while lining up on the left side 66% of the snaps this season. That's going to give Mike Jackson a lot of opportunities. It's DeAndre Hopkins. So
Yeah.
sure, he's going to give some catches, but the tackles, that'll definitely be there. And passes defended, that can always happen as well, very easily. And Kyler Murray, you never know. He might throw it behind Hopkins, then might get a pick out of him as well. So must start this week.
Yeah, I mean, he had 3 pass deflections last week against the Giants, so he has been very active in that regard. And it's interesting thinking about the Seahawks defense. They are so young. It's another guy that's under 20 or 25 or younger playing really well for him. But yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that Arizona offense has been so DeAndre Hopkins centric, and I think a lot of people were expecting them to ease him back into it, which I mean, I was all in on DeAndre Hopkins. I drafted him in a trillion leagues this year. Getting him in the 8th round, I was like, yeah, no brainer. I don't care. I'll use him
Me
for the
too.
playoff stretch. So I have him in so many leagues, and I've been very happy with the production so far. But yeah, from a IDP side of things, I mean, it offers a great opportunity. You know, he's getting 10 plus targets and 6 plus catches every single week. I mean, I would put money on it right now that he's going to hit that almost every game this season around those numbers because that's how much they're forcing him the ball. And that offers a lot. Once again, it's a low floor. He's going to get, a good number of tackles this week, Mike Jackson, just from being in that situation. So I like that one a lot. That's a smart play there. My first defensive back is Jabril Peppers, who's been a little more active for the New England Patriots the last few weeks, going up against the Colts, who actually allow the most points to safeties. Once again, it's one of these teams that not only are they run heavy, which offers, and Jabril Peppers tends to play a little more in the box, but they are very run heavy. They have the young quarterback. They have been very prone to turning over the ball this year, so there's the upside there as well. Kyle Duggar's a little banged up right now. He's actually questionable. We'll see whether or not he plays. If he doesn't, I think this stream is a lot stronger, but either way, with Duggar being banged up, Jabril Peppers has been on the field a lot more over the last 2 weeks, and during that span, he's had 13 tackles over his last 2 games, so he's been very solid. And if Kyle Duggar is out, I like the matchup. I like the opportunity for him to be really involved in that game plan. So my first defensive back is Jabril Peppers, and I will mention Jerry's as well. Roger McCreary of the Titans going up against the Chiefs, and then Jalen Hawkins of the Falcons going up against the Chargers. And I like both of those ones quite a bit as well. I actually ended up ranking Roger McCreary. I believe it was towards the back half of my top 25. I want to say it was around 23 off the top of my head. So I do like that matchup for him. I think it's under the radar. And then Jalen Hawkins coming back from that injury. He was looking really, really good before he went out. So I think he's a guy we could be talking about streaming quite a bit over the next few weeks.
Definitely. All right, my second defensive back, it's going to be Tyson Campbell, cornerback for the Jaguars. He's still rostered in less than 5% of all IDP leagues, having a great season. He's had 6 or more tackles in 3 out of the last 4 games. He's registered at least 1 pass defense in 5 of 8 contests. And then he has a history of shadowing, which means he's going to be shadowing Devontae Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And Devontae Adams, well, last week barely got any targets, understood. He had the flu. That probably played a big factor into his conditioning and targets and snap share, and then just throwing him the ball in general. So I think his target share it's going to bounce right back up to the 10 plus that it's always been. And they play struggling offense that, I mean, it is the Raiders who just don't like using Hunter Renfrow, basically, it seems like. And Darren Waller, he's most likely going to miss the game again. So it's really just Adams for Carr to throw to. So definitely should mean a lot of chances for Campbell.
Yeah, no, I like that one quite a bit. My last one is Damar Hamlin of the Buffalo Bills going up against the Jets, who allow the 8th most points to safeties. I think it's interesting. It's not a name that has come up on our show, but he's played really well over the last 4 weeks for that Bills secondary. So if you look at his numbers over the last 4 weeks, he had 10 tackles last week and a half tackle for loss. And then before that, he had 3 straight weeks of 6+ solo tackles. So he's been really effective in putting up pretty solid numbers in that front. And I think it's gone kind of under the radar because the Bills have, I don't know, the Bills defense in general is kind of interesting. They don't have that many big names, but they're still the #1 defense in the league. I mean, Trey White's been out and they rotate their defensive linemen every 15, every play. I mean, they have a whole new defensive line and, no real huge names in that linebacking core. And everybody talks about Jordan Poyer is probably maybe the face of that defense. And he's going to be out this week as well, which is one of the reasons I like Damar Hamlin. But it's a good matchup for him against the Jets. Once again, you have some potential there with them. They're a fairly balanced team, but also the turnover possibility with Zach Wilson, who's been a little reckless with the ball as of late. So he offers the tackle floor, the potential for some turnovers. So I like Damar Hamlin. I think he deserves a little bit of a shout out because he's been pretty effective over the last 4 weeks for that Bills defense. All right, let's move over to the defensive streams then. I'll bring up Jerry's first, and this one is an interesting one to me. He has the Dolphins going up against the Bears. The Bears have been a very good offense to stream against this year, but they have looked a lot better recently. They've looked a little more put together, which has been very encouraging to me because I love Justin Fields, and I'm like, finally. But I think it's a good opportunity for the Dolphins because with that talent and all these pieces that they have and the lack of offensive line for the Bears, and I know they look better, but with that talented front, this should be the kind of game where they eat Justin Fields alive. So I think it's a nice test for him right off the bat. And I know it's maybe unfair because they're going to be trying to put Chubb in there week 1 here to see if they can get him acclimated. But to me, it seems like the kind of matchup where they should be a top 10 defense. Whether or not that happens, I think is going to say a lot about the direction of where this defense is going to go for the rest of the season. Because on paper, yes, this is a fantastic stream, and I've picked them up a few times because the options are slim pickings this week, I think, for streamers. Even when we're talking about some of these options that we have, I was looking beforehand, and the Dolphins are owned over 60% in Yahoo leagues right now. So, they're still, owned in over 50% of leagues. So not your obvious, oh, they're definitely going to be available. They're available in a good chunk, but I feel like that's a lot of the streamers this week. And the one that you have mentioned is probably one of the lower ownership percentages. So the one you have is pretty good, but there's really not a lot of options this week.
Yeah, with all those teams on bye, it's so hard to stream a defense this week. So yeah, I got the Bengals versus the Panthers, and this is no disrespect to PJ Walker or the Panthers offense. They're not dropping 34 every week. They played a very weak Atlanta defense last week, and they've given up the 11th most fantasy points to defenses coming into week 9. And the Bengals, they do have a sack in every single game. And again, playing a team like PJ Walker, that offensive line isn't that great. Besides Taylor Moton, that they can get to the quarterback as well. I would expect, honestly, since PJ Walker does usually throw a pick or two every single game, I would expect 1 or 2 and at least 1 sack, possibly 2 or 3. And again, in a week where 6 teams are on bye and we're talking 3 top defenses, it can't really be that picky. So just got to go with it.
It's funny how quickly this changes too. So I brought up the Bengals here on Yahoo quickly, and they are 81% rostered right now. But in the last week, that has gone up 42%. I mean, that just tells you right there the amount that they're being streamed, because not that they've been overly effective. You did mention they actually have been pretty solid in terms of forcing turnovers and getting sacks, so they do offer some sort of floor there. But I mean, going through it, I mean, you see that you have the Bills against the Jets, the Patriots against the Colts is pretty solid, but the Patriots are owned. The Eagles you had in a good matchup against the Texans, even though they were kind of subpar in terms of defensive scoring. You have the Bucks going against the Rams. By the way, the Rams allow the most points to fantasy defenses, which I don't like saying that out loud, but you have Kansas City going up against the Titans. I've seen some people offer that as a potential streaming option there. I'd be a little nervous because of how the Chiefs can't necessarily contain the run, so that makes me a little nervous. So I can understand why somebody would do that, but I don't know if I have the guts to do that.
Yeah, the one thing with the Chiefs versus Titans that's gonna be on is Tannehill playing or is Malik Willis playing?
Yeah.
Because if it's Malik Willis playing, the Chiefs know that it's gonna be okay. We don't have to do anything besides stack 9 in the box to stop Henry. So we'll see what happens with that. It'll depend very much so. It being a Sunday night game, though, gives more time for Tannehill to come back. So that actually could be an advantage as well. But yeah, I mean, the last time Derrick Henry's at over 150 yards the last 2 times he's played the Chiefs in the regular season. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, the one that I actually have, I'm surprised they're not owned more. They haven't lived up to expectations, but I think the talent is there. It's the Packers. So they're 62% owned right now. That has gone up 15% the last week, so they were under 50% before. I'm assuming other people streaming them this week. They go up against the Lions. The Packers defense really didn't play that poorly against the Bills last week. I think that's gone under the radar. Josh Allen only had 218 yards and 2 picks. I mean, that's not a very good game. Now, don't get me wrong, they could not stop the run, but I mean, their defense played pretty well. That kept them in that game. It was really the offense that couldn't get it done for them. So I like the matchup, and I still think I believe in this defense, and if they're going to be a playoff contending team, that defense is going to be what keeps them in games.
Yeah, I like that pick because it did go under the radar because Josh Allen came in at averaging like 330 passing yards a game. And I don't remember the last time I've ever seen him throw for less than like 275 at least. So, and then he got reckless with the football as well. And that's another thing that Allen does. He's a gunslinger. So the Packers, definitely got a very good opportunity this week. And then, losing Hawkinson, who was a safety valve, it's going to hurt. So definitely, I like that.
All right. Any other notes to wrap things up here? Anything else you want to touch on that you think we missed?
I just think, we'll sit by, there's so many players on bye this week that it's going to be a tough fantasy week for everybody. Some guys might win with guys that only score 8 points when normally their guys are scoring 20 points, so it's going to be interesting to see. Probably a lot of lower scores this week coming out.
Yeah, no, probably a lot of lower scores, and it's not only the buys, but there are on the offensive side of the ball too, a lot of significant injuries right now as well. So you add in injuries this time of year, because we get to that mid-season points where some of these teams, they need a bye week to just rest up and get healthy. So you hit this time of year, you see more guys missing a game here and there. You see, throw the bye weeks into the equation, and it becomes a pretty big challenge for a fantasy owner to just kind of put it all together. So good luck to everybody this week. Make sure you follow the show's Twitter at cover00 spelled out GF2. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you guys next time.